Welcome back to Tech, Tesla and Trends. Tonight, we're going to talk about the supercharging network. And in particular, I'm going to step back and look at the 2021 charging infrastructure benchmark done by umlot, an engineering company from Europe there. But looking at what their overall benchmark decisions were, they broke it out into a technical and a software. And I found the decisions that were part of that breakout very entertaining, somewhat comical even, because from a technical perspective, it was very clear that Tesla had completely met and exceeded the overall expectations of the test between the Mach-E and Model 3 and the charging and the whole infrastructure aspect of where it was at, how quickly it responded, and the overall reliability of charging locations, which no surprise there. But interesting in the in thinking about how this is all planned and grown over the years is that Tesla hasn't just been sitting on its laurels and resting doing nothing. They began building out, or announced in September, so it was September 24th in 2012, I think, and that they announced that they had 6 stations, and that they were building out this supercharger network, and people were going to be able to have, if they bought a Model S or X or whatever it was back then, it was the S back then, they were getting free supercharging. Woohoo! For life. That was a really great deal. And then by 2018, Tesla had gone from those first 6 stations and roughly probably about 45 charging stalls at that point in those 6 stations, because the average is about 9. So in 2018, they had 10,000 charging stalls, which, 6 years, that's pretty impressive growth. By 2020, they were at 20,000 charging stalls. That's a doubling there in their, and 2 years. And then 2021, again, they kicked 10,000 out in 1 year. And this year, last reported number that I could find was in June, and they were over 5,000 at that point, taking the overall global numbers for charging stations on the supercharger network, the number of stalls, to over 35,000. I think Wikipedia has the number at 36,165 right now, with Tesla website being cited as the source. But looking at where that overall growth is, in a matter of 10 years, there are 35,000 stalls. Now, everything Tesla seems to do is focused on a growth of roughly 50%, not just in revenues or in number of cars manufactured, but in everything else. They are working towards that doubling. So it is very reasonable to postulate that within the next decade, that there could easily be more than double that number. So if we take 5 years more, that might actually be at that doubling point, and then 5, which would take us to 70,000, and then another 5 years beyond that for the next double there, taking it to about 140,000 charging stalls by 2032. That will more than build out the requirements, I think, for much of the travel and road need for charging along trips, from a Tesla perspective at least. Perhaps they'll be able to increase that number a little bit more, but if it would require them to spin up another factory or expand the factory that they currently have for producing supercharging stalls. Looking at where that overall growth is leading, though, makes it very clear that Tesla has a plan long term for the electrification of the road system and that transition from gasoline into an electrified future. And that they have been playing with that goal in mind since 2012. Many of the reports that you'll hear or read or see today have a bias that seems to indicate that, we just don't have an electrical network set up to be able to charge all of these cars. Really? If you take a look at Tesla's Supercharger Network around the globe, it's pretty clear that just about anywhere you want to go, there's a supercharger. Now, where I'm at, in the northern climes, it's a little more difficult. But even in that regard, in the last year alone, we've seen the number of stalls that have been installed more than double. So it comes down to, who are we going to believe? And we have to make that choice. Tesla's been playing very clearly with their hand and producing a charging network that is not just for one country, but the world over, because that's part of their master plan to electrify the world in that regard, to speed the adoption. And that is exactly what they're doing across the board. And everything they do has that as part of that focus. So when I read an article or see charts and graphs like what were in the EV charging infrastructure benchmark from 2021, where it clearly illustrates that, or where their end result is that EV or Electrify America is the best network and Supercharger is the second best network. Yet they're technical, from a technical perspective, the reliability and availability and all the rest of that, Tesla wins. But on the app side, that's where EVM or Electrify America comes in on top. There's some wrangling that appears to have occurred so that and I don't know if there's lobbying going on there, but it does have a feel that the numbers were massaged and categories decided upon to provide for a result that doesn't necessarily agree with the reality of what EV drivers are experiencing. If you look online, it's pretty clear that the vast majority of Tesla drivers utilizing the supercharging network are quite happy. Yes, there are issues in some locations, but Tesla is building out the supercharging network at a rate that none of the other charging networks are able to even touch. In fact, I found it interesting, the overall charge times start and stop for Electrify America was 26.9 seconds to start and 5.8 seconds to stop, where Tesla was at 8.49 to start and 1.47 seconds to stop. There's a significant difference in the speed with which Tesla begins and ends its charging cycles. And overall, the commentary within that article just was very much focused on the shocking nature that Electrify America would come out on top. And I found that somewhat comical. Anyways, to me, as I read it, it came up with that's the split nature of it between technical and software was arbitrarily arrived at to provide EV or Electrify America with the top slot. Perhaps that is just my reading of the tea leaves there, and perhaps I'm totally wrong about the logic behind umlot's decision and how they broke that out. But it looked, from a numbers perspective, and a guy who reads charts, it looked a little fishy. Perhaps a slight short circuit there in my logic. Who knows? But looking at it, I just could not help but laugh. When you read between the lines, it was very clear that even the testers found Tesla to be a better network overall. They just couldn't quantify it the way that they wanted to or needed to. I'm not sure which one it is. I certainly hope that when umlot goes through and does their 2022 charging infrastructure benchmark, that they will be a little more circumspect in that process. But perhaps that's overly ambitious and hopeful on my part. As my wife has often said, I am the dreamer and the optimist amongst us. Well, in this case, I'm optimistic that eventually the obvious nature and obvious conclusion that the Tesla Supercharger Network is not only built for speeding the adoption of electrification of vehicles, but that it is the best network overall for all EVs as Tesla opens up its EV network or its charging network to all other EVs. And maybe Congress will eventually listen to Aptera and adopt the Tesla charger. And we'll see how that plays out over the next 5 to 10 years of wrangling politically. Who knows? It's always a game in these particular conversations where standards and lobbyists are involved. For now, I'd love to hear your comments and what your thoughts are on charging networks and the overall way that umlot and their EV charging infrastructure benchmark is set up. Is it as odd to your eyes as it is to mine? I'll talk to you a little bit later, tomorrow night. Have a good one.